The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This is The Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
People love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, get in the zone. It's The Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Joining you now from Washington, D.C. President Donald Trump is scheduled to address the nation tomorrow evening at 9 p.m. Eastern regarding newly discovered evidence of foreign interference in the 2020 presidential election. Now, does this regard China or Venezuela or Ukraine? Well, nobody really knows. The president's aides are being extraordinarily tight-lipped about it, as is the intelligence community. So if you want to know, you're just going to have to tune in. That's what I'll be doing. There are some who are saying already in the mainstream media that this is just a distraction from the 2026 elections. Those are the same people who tended to downgrade the disclosures by Tulsi Gabbard when she declassified documents that proved definitively that the Russian collusion narrative was a hoax cooked up by President Barack Obama and his intelligence community leaders, including the CIA Director John Brennan, the FBI Director James Comey, the Director of National Intelligence General Clapper, and so on. So once again, I expect the president to have some bombshell revelations tomorrow that the mainstream media will immediately try to poo-poo and downplay. Meanwhile, President Trump's latest moves in the Straits of Hormuz show that his new pressure campaign against Iran is working and that the conflict may finally be beginning to unwind. President Trump announced Tuesday that he's replacing a proposed 20% shipping reimbursement fee on major trade and investment agreements from Gulf states. At the same time, the United States will maintain a full blockade on all vessels traveling to or from Iranian ports or carrying Iranian cargo. This presumably also includes oil shipments from Kharg Island to China, where 90% of Iran's oil is sent. The message is unmistakable. International shipping can now move freely, oil can keep flowing, and Iran alone will pay the price for its aggression. President Trump credited the United States military with reopening the straits after American forces struck Iranian coastal defenses, missile sites, drone facilities, and maritime capabilities. President Donald Trump gave peace a chance, but it's clear that the Ayatollahs will not live up to any peace agreement, including the MOU that was painstakingly negotiated under the leadership of Vice President J.D. Vance. Those operations further weaken Tehran's ability to threaten commercial shipping. Now Gulf nations are responding with what President Trump described as massive new investments in American factories, plants, equipment, and jobs. If you ask me, this is a masterclass in geopolitical maneuvering by President Trump. He's using overwhelming military strength, economic pressure, and hard bargaining to force better outcomes without trapping America in another endless ground war. The Iranian regime remains belligerent, but its position is swiftly deteriorating. Its military capabilities are being degraded, its shipping is isolated, and its regional leverage appears to be shrinking. What remains of the regime may continue issuing threats, but it cannot sustain this pressure indefinitely. Conflict is far from over, but the momentum has clearly shifted. President Trump is protecting global commerce, strengthening America's economy, and tightening the noose around Tehran, all the while making it clear that Iran will never obtain a nuclear weapon. Something he's been saying, by the way, since 1988, when he said it at a Portsmouth, New Hampshire Chamber of Commerce luncheon. So President Trump's position on Iran having a nuclear weapon has been consistent, and anyone who says contrary, well, I was there. Meanwhile, special counsel Jack Smith, it turns out, actually spied on the text messages, the actual content of text messages, by 44 individual members of Congress. Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley of Iowa revealed Tuesday that the former special counsel Jack Smith actually obtained text messages involving 44 members of Congress and senior White House officials during the closing months of President Trump's first term. The messages were collected after the National Archives responded to a sweeping subpoena covering records from October 2020 through January 2021. Jack Smith's team received the material on August 2023, shortly after indicting President Trump over his totally constitutional challenge to the 2020 election. Senator Grassley, a longtime chairman of the Judiciary Committee, says that Smith must now answer for an extraordinarily aggressive and unconstitutional, and I believe illegal, fishing expedition that reached deep into communications involving elected lawmakers in what was an egregious violation of their Fourth Amendment rights. I want to be clear, this is not just a list of who spoke to whom, but the actual text of messages by members of Congress and senior members of the administration. These lawmakers and White House staffers committed no crimes. They were targeted because they were part of the political opposition. This is nothing short of a Soviet-style operation that was run by Jack Smith. By the way, the speech or debate clause specifically protects members of Congress from executive branch intrusion into legitimate legislative activity. That safeguard exists to prevent federal prosecutors from using government power to intimidate or control lawmakers. Smith blatantly ignored the law in his extraordinary zeal to make an example out of President Trump and his allies. Grassley, the senator from Iowa, has pledged to bring Smith before the Senate Judiciary Committee and demand accountability and answers. The latest disclosure follows earlier revelations that Smith's investigations also obtained call records connected to several Republican lawmakers as well as Trump supporters. I myself was on that list. Americans now understand that a politically charged Justice Department crossed constitutional lines while pursuing President Trump and his allies. No prosecutor should be above scrutiny. It's time for Jack Smith to face justice. Anything short of a prosecution for treason would be letting him off easy. Meanwhile, New York's tax and spend model is driving away the very people who keep the state's finances afloat. A new Citizens Budget Commission study finds that the Empire State's share of America's millionaires fell from 12.7% in 2010 to just 8.7% in 2022. This is the steepest decline of any state in the nation. The consequences, of course, are enormous. Researchers estimate that New York would have collected roughly $10.7 billion more in personal income taxes in 2022 alone if it had simply maintained its earlier share of high-income earners. That warning comes as socialist New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani pushes for even higher taxes on the wealthy, despite growing evidence that punitive tax policies simply encourage residents, investors, and businesses to leave the Empire State. Governor Kathy Hochul declined to raise income or corporate tax rates, but New York still imposed a pied-à-terre tax on expensive second homes in the city. Mamdani, you may remember, celebrated the move outside billionaire Ken Griffith's Manhattan penthouse, turning tax policy into a political stunt. Griffin responded by threatening to pull $6 billion from Midtown development, exactly the kind of investment that New York really can't afford to lose. The pattern is visible nationwide. The New York Stock Exchange has expanded into Texas, while companies such as Tesla have moved their headquarters out of high-tax California. The lesson here is simple. Wealth creators are not trapped. They have options. They're not handcuffed to one particular state or municipality. The Founding Fathers designed America to prevent one centralized authority from imposing top-down tyranny upon the people. New York's leaders will have to learn the hard way because Mamdani is an ideologue who will never budge on his far-left agenda. The money will continue to flee, and New Yorkers will have to suffer for years before having a chance to end this particular nightmare. Meanwhile, Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett delivered a sobering warning to Congress this week, and that is that threats against America's highest courts are no longer just abstract political rhetoric. They're reaching the homes and families of justices themselves. Justice Barrett appeared before a House committee to support the Supreme Court's request for more than $228 million in funding for the next fiscal year, including an additional $14.6 million for security. The proposal would expand the Supreme Court police add 6 protection agents for each justice, and cover security costs when justices travel outside of Washington, D.C. Justice Barrett's testimony exposed the human cost of radical intimidation campaigns that followed the leak of the court's Roe v. Wade decision. Barrett recalled having to explain to her young son what a bulletproof vest was and why his mother had to wear one simply for doing her constitutional duty. She also described a swatting attack on her home roughly 6 weeks ago. Her teenage son opened the door to find police vehicles responding to a false report of gunshots and raised voices. This is what happens when political activists demonize judges for refusing to serve as unelected lawmakers. Common sense Americans have warned for years that reckless attacks on the court would invite real-world danger. Congress should approve the additional security funding without delay, in my opinion. Protecting Justice Barrett and her colleagues is not a partisan issue. It's a basic defense of constitutional government, judicial independence, and the rule of law against intimidation, mob pressure, and political violence in the United States. However, Justice Barrett has some recent sketchy rulings, including ruling against President Trump's prohibition on birthright citizenship. If Coney Barrett does not have a stomach to do his right in the midst of political pressure, she should actually consider resigning from the bench. However, I do believe the added security will help her rediscover her lost principles. At least I pray for that. Meanwhile, the Treasury Department is making America's 250th anniversary with new currency honoring President Trump's historic leadership. A redesigned $100 bill will carry Donald Trump's signature alongside that of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's, among the president's very best appointees, in my view, making Donald Trump the first president to have his name printed on American paper money while he was serving. His signature will also appear across all bill denominations issued for the anniversary. Secretary Bessent said the change will cost taxpayers absolutely nothing. Federal law requires U.S. currency to include "In God We Trust" and prohibits of living people on paper money, but presidential signatures are permitted. Treasury is also preparing a commemorative, non-circulating dollar coin featuring President Trump's portrait. Because it's a special coin rather than ordinary circulating currency, it's not restricted by the law requiring presidents to be deceased before appearing on standard presidential coins. This move recalls 1926 when Calvin Coolidge, Silent Cal, became the first sitting president portrayed on a commemorative coin during his lifetime. Bessent predicts Americans will want to save bills bearing President Trump's signature, which could also benefit the Treasury when currency remains out of circulation. These new bills, which were advocated by the Treasurer, Brendan Beach, are expected to reach the public this fall. Treasury officials say the designation recognizes both the nation's semi-quincentennial and Trump's role in advancing America's current economic revival. A prototype $250 bill featuring President Trump's portrait has also been prepared, although Congress would have to authorize that. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. When we come back, we'll talk about the federal chair of the Federal Reserve and the moves that he's making to hold down inflation. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Whatever you do, don't go away.
The Stone Zone. Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Roger Stone was persecuted. People forget he's actually a brilliant political analyst.
Now, get him his own. It's the Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
And you're back in the Stone Zone. Joining you now from Washington, D.C. President Trump's newly appointed Federal Reserve Chairman, Kevin Warsh, is delivering a welcome message to Congress, and that is that the era of tolerating crushing inflation must now come to an end. In his first semi-annual testimony as chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Warsh declared that central bank policymakers have, quote, no tolerance, close quote, for persistently high prices and are firmly committed to restoring price stability. This is exactly the resolve that American families need after 5 years of inflation eroded wages, punished savers, and drove up the cost of groceries, housing, energy, and nearly everything else. Kevin Warsh, the new chairman of the Fed, says the Fed's number one objective is getting monetary policy right promising that the recent inflation surge will become a thing of the past. He also defended keeping interest rates between 3.5 and 3.75% while officials evaluate continuing inflation risks. Unlike Washington politicians who downplay rising prices or blame everyone but themselves, Warsh recognizes that monetary policy plays a central role in controlling long-term inflation. He also offered a cautiously optimistic view of the economy, pointing to stable employment, fewer layoffs, solid wage growth, stronger manufacture and expanding business investment, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence and technology. But Federal Reserve Chairman Warsh is wisely refusing to declare victory too soon. Energy shocks and stubborn underlying price pressure could ignite inflation, and for that he's being cautious. The new chairman is also reviewing the Fed's communications, balance sheet, economic data, productivity policies, and inflation models. Warsh deserves credit for emphasizing discipline, accountability, and sound money. After years of reckless spending, easy money policies, and outright sabotage from his predecessor, Jerome Too Late Powell, who ignored the unemployment and inflation rate and refused to cut interest rates when it was merited, Warsh is delivering a Federal Reserve that is willing to protect the dollar, defend working families, and confront inflation without political fear or fashionable excuses. Now, this is a welcome change. I point out that Jerome Powell, his predecessor, was a lawyer and not an economist, and that Powell cut interest rates when the unemployment and inflation rates were far less favorable than they are today in order to assist in the attempted re-election of Joe Biden. So the appointment of Warsh is a welcome respite from that. And these new policies, I think, are designed to have sound money and, more importantly, lower interest rates. Lower interest rates means more housing, more availability of credit, and so on. This is a key move when it comes to making America great again. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. We're all set for President Trump's big announcement tomorrow night when he addresses the nation regarding what he says is newly found evidence of foreign interference in the 2020 election. I'll be watching. I hope you will too. You're listening to the Stone Zone, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
You are now re-entering the Stone Zone. Joining you now from Washington, D.C. Federal banking regulators are finally closing a loophole that allowed illegal immigrants to obtain loans from American financial institutions without any meaningful scrutiny of their legal status. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the FDIC, and the National Credit Union Administration are now advising banks to consider proof of continuing work authorization and other documentation before deciding whether a borrower can realistically repay a loan. Regulators are also warning financial institutions to watch for concentrated lending in industries, employers, and regions likely to be affected by President Donald Trump's expanded immigration enforcement. The guidance follows Trump's main executive order, issued in May, was entitled the Restoring Integrity to America's Financial Systems Act, which directed federal agencies to strengthen identity checks and lending standards for people living in the country illegally. For years, federal law failed to clearly prevent banks from serving illegal immigrants, leaving taxpayers, depositors, and financial institutions exposed to unnecessary risk while rewarding those who violated America's immigration laws. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was also warned banks about obvious credit dangers of lending to people who lacked legal authorization. Obviously, the chances of repayment are about zilch. President Trump has suggested going further by shutting down accounts used to facilitate illegal immigration. This is basic common sense. American banks should serve lawful customers, protect depositors, and verify that borrowers have both the legal rights and the financial capability to repay their debts. The Trump administration is right to restore this accountability. Access to America's financial system is not an entitlement for those who have entered or remain in the country illegally without consequences. Meanwhile, a Minnesota sheriff is warning that political correctness and media silence are allowing a dangerous gang problem to grow across the state of Minnesota, specifically in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region. Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher says that roughly 300 young people are now associated with 12 Somali gangs operating throughout the metro area and beyond. Authorities say these gangs have been connected to more than 100 shootings and at least 14 murders over the past 2 years, including violence at graduations, public gatherings, and even at the Minnesota State Fair. Investigators describe the groups as young, heavily armed, and driven less by drug profits than by ego, social media attention, personal feuds, and public displays of dominance. Fletcher criticized local media and political leaders for refusing to confront this issue honestly out of fear that discussing it could be labeled as, you guessed it, racist. That cowardice has severe consequences. Minnesota officials have been aware of organized Somali gang activity for nearly 2 decades. Earlier investigations documented robberies, firearms offenses, trafficking allegations, fraud, and violence spreading between several American cities. Yet the problem was repeatedly minimized when elected leaders focused more on protecting their political image than protecting innocent residents. Under the leadership of Tampon Tim Walz, the problem with Somali thuggery has gotten even worse. Law enforcement needs to target violent offenders aggressively, regardless of race, religion, or national origin. Third world savages should not be given a pass because authorities lack the testicular fortitude to root out their anti-civilization behavior. Communities must also be compelled to cooperate in identifying gang members and rejected imported clan rivalries that seem to be fueling this conflict. Public safety is not racism. Enforcing the law is not discrimination. Minnesota's leaders must stop making excuses, support police, prosecute violent criminals, and restore order before the rule of the jungle replaces the rule of law. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is launching a campaign to defend American sovereignty against the International Criminal Court, or ICC, as it's known. In a July 13 statement, the State Department said it is considering sanctions, visa revocations, travel bans, and diplomatic pressure on foreign governments supporting the court while relying on American aid. The goal is to stop unelected international bureaucrats from claiming power over U.S. troops and officials. You see, America never joined the International Criminal Court, yet the court still claims authority to investigate and prosecute Americans for actions taken in countries that recognize its jurisdiction. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called that an intolerable attack on American independence and sovereignty. He warned that the International Criminal Court is waging war against the United States through statutes, treaties, and so-called international law rather than bullets. Rubio correctly stated the court has evolved into a radical global tribunal staffed by unaccountable bureaucrats who believe their power has no limits. This administration is also urging other nations to withdraw from the International Criminal Court and warns that countries cannot expect American assistance while helping foreign judges target American citizens. President Trump has opposed this court for years, especially after prosecutors examined allegations involving U.S. personnel in Afghanistan. This is not about shielding criminals. It's about preserving the constitutional right of Americans to be judged under American law. The nation fought a revolution to escape distant rulers claiming authority over its people. The Trump administration is right to make the point that no foreign court will sit in judgment of American servicemen, officials, or our sovereignty. And after we get rid of the world of the scourge that is the International Criminal Court, we need to get out of the United Nations again while we're at it. Meanwhile, the House delivered a victory for common sense on Tuesday, voting 308 to 117 to end the wasteful ritual of changing America's clocks twice a year. The Sunshine Protecting Act would make daylight saving times permanent across most of the country, keeping the current March to November schedule in place year-round, unless individual states choose to opt out before the law takes effect. Republican leadership celebrated this vote. I celebrate it myself. It's just common sense. Representative Scott DeJarlis of Tennessee marked the moment by playing the Beatles' Here Comes the Sun as the final tally was announced. President Trump has strongly backed this measure, calling the twice-yearly clock change a ridiculous production that costs Americans time, money, and peace of mind. President Trump has pledged to work hard to get the bill signed into law, describing it as both a practical reform and a political win for common sense. The legislation now heads to the Senate, where it faces a tougher road, as Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas will stand in the legislation's way, arguing that the status quo is somehow superior. Public frustration with clock switching has grown for decades as more have realized the pointlessness and inconvenience of daylight savings time, originally designed when we had a largely agricultural economy. 19 states have already approved measures supporting permanent daylight savings times if Congress gives the green light. The Senate passed a similar bill in 2022, but then the House failed to act. This time the House has done its job. We have to see if the Senate will act. It's now time to find out whether the Senate will preserve an outdated government mandate or finally give Americans a stable, predictable clock. I'll be watching. Meanwhile, this is a distasteful story, but federal and state health officials are investigating whether Taco Bell restaurants may be connected to a major cyclospora outbreak, with lettuce and other salad ingredients under scrutiny as possible sources. Michigan has reported more than 2,600 cases, making this the largest outbreak of the parasite in state history and one of the nation's biggest in years. Cyclospora is a microscopic parasite that can cause severe gastrointestinal illness, which I'm not going to describe here in detail because it is, well, too distasteful. Michigan health officials say that evidence points towards lettuce or salad greens, although other foods have not been ruled out. Investigators have not identified a specific farm, supplier, or type of produce responsible. Signs recently posted at some Detroit area Taco Bell locations said lettuce, cilantro, onions, pico de gallo, and guacamole were unavailable because of what it described as a national recall. However, the Food and Drug Administration has not publicly announced such a recall or formally linked Taco Bell to the outbreak. And we have no evidence here at the Stone Zone that clearly indicates that Taco Bell is responsible. That lack of clear information raises serious questions about government transparency and food supply accountability. Americans deserve immediate, accurate answers when thousands of people may have been exposed to contaminated food. Taco Bell, for example, serves more than 40 million customers every week in the United States, meaning any potential connection must be investigated quickly and without bureaucratic delay. No deaths have been reported, but the source remains unknown. Health agencies must identify where the contamination began, hold negligent suppliers accountability, and tell the public exactly what the officials knew and when they knew it. Protecting American families should come before protecting corporate food producers. If Taco Bell is guilty in perpetuating this crisis, they should be held accountable for their unsanitary practices. If they are not, well, we should know that as well. Meanwhile, a coalition of 12 Democrat-led states is trying to derail Paramount's $81 billion takeover of Warner Brothers. Discovery and the timing makes it clear that the lawsuit is a shameless political stunt. The merger would combine Paramount, CBS, Paramount Plus, Warner Brothers, HBO Max, CNN, and film libraries under one company. State attorneys general claim the deal would reduce competition, raise prices, and threaten entertainment jobs. But Paramount says the lawsuit twists antitrust law, is meant to protect dominant streaming giants, like the disgustingly woke Netflix, from a stronger rival. The Trump Justice Department is reviewing the transaction and declined to challenge it, concluding that the combined company would increase competition and benefit both consumers and workers. Notably, every state suing is led by a Democrat. In other words, no Republican Attorney General has joined this case. That matters because Paramount has moved to a more conservative direction since Sundance took control. CBS has also undergone leadership and editorial changes, which has deeply triggered the entrenched journalistic establishment at 60 Minutes, where the Trump administration has openly welcomed the possibility that CNN would receive a long overdue shakeup under its new ownership. Now, Democrat officials, liberal unions, and Hollywood activists are suddenly demanding that courts freeze the merger. They call it antitrust enforcement. But Americans have seen this playbook before. When conservatives begin gaining influence inside a major institution, the left always calls for government overreach to stop it. The courts should examine the facts, not enforce a liberal agenda meant to dominate the airwaves. A stronger Paramount could challenge big tech, revive theatrical competition, preserve jobs, and bring ideological balance to an entertainment industry dominated for decades by the progressive left. They're losing their stranglehold on the minds of the public, and they're not happy. The rise of Paramount is a serious game changer for common sense Americans. 6 years after the COVID lockdowns were in full force, the catastrophic failure of America's pandemic response is undeniable. Public health experts discarded decades of established planning, embraced flawed data from China, and ignored early warnings from epidemiologists like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya that the virus had already spread widely. The results were lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine passports, and school closures that dragged on for years, devastating lives, destroying the economy, and hurting children while changing the course of history. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to the Stone Zone. Don't go away because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
You are now re-entering the Stone Zone. Joining you now from Washington, D.C. I can tell you this city is abuzz regarding President Donald Trump's address to the nation tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern, where he has said online that he's going to be addressing new information regarding foreign interference in the 2020 presidential election. Now, does this regard China or Venezuela, or is it Ukraine? Frankly, no one knows, and White House aides, who I spoke to today, remain very tight-lipped. Even my contacts in the intelligence community, they're not saying. This is going to be a historic address. The mainstream media is already downplaying it as insignificant. We shall see. Meanwhile, neoconservative stalwart and vehement never-Trumper Bill Kristol, you remember him. He's the guy who, as Vice President of the United States, insisted that Iraq was responsible for the attack on America on 9/11 and that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, driving us into a war responsible for killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and tens of thousands of Americans. Now, he's openly calling for the abolition of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, the federal agency responsible for enforcing immigration laws and removing dangerous illegal aliens. Abolish ICE now, Bill Kristol said on a post on X this past Monday, putting himself squarely alongside the far-left activists who want America's borders weakened and immigration enforcement dismantled. Kristol also celebrated reports that the Department of Homeland Security temporarily halted certain vehicle stop detentions following 2 fatal encounters involving illegal migrant drivers. Rather than supporting careful reforms while preserving enforcement, Bill Kristol demanded even greater pressure against what he called the nation's mass deportation regime. Bill Kristol, once reviewed as a leading Republican intellectual during the era of George W. Bush, that may explain a lot about the immense failures the Republican Party endured during that era. Kristol's interventionist, pro-globalization policies always fit comfortably with an establishment agenda of high immigration, cheap labor, and limited concern for the impact on American workers. Because of Bill Kristol's influence, millions were killed needlessly in endless wars that were waged based, as I said earlier, entirely on lies. President Donald Trump shattered the neocon consensus by promising secure borders, lower immigration, and an economy that puts American citizens first. And so far, he's delivering on all counts. Bill Kristol has moved closer to Democrats who oppose deportations and favor expansive migration policies. His position is deeply disconnected with millions of working-class Americans who understand that uncontrolled immigration strains housing, schools, hospitals, wages, and public safety. ICE is not the enemy. Criminal cartels, human traffickers, violent offenders, and politicians who refuse to enforce the law are the problem. America does not need to abolish ICE. It needs to strengthen the agency, defend its officers, enforce existing law, and make it clear that citizenship and national sovereignty still matter. And frankly, jettisoning Kristol and the neocons was the best thing the Republican Party could ever actually do. Meanwhile, OpenAI is reportedly developing a bizarre new household device designed to act less like a tool and more like a substitute for human companionship. The screen-free mobile smart speaker would connect with ChatGPT, access a user's digital life, and learn personal habits over time. Internal descriptions reportedly call it a human-like AI companion that lives in the home. This sounds creepy to me. The device may even contain mechanical parts that move independently, creating what developers describe as a physical version of ChatGPT with its own personality. That should raise some serious questions. Americans already spend too much time staring at screens, talking through apps, and replacing real communities with digital substitutes. Now, Silicon Valley wants families to welcome an always listening machine into their home, one that studies emails, tracks routines, anticipates desires, and attempts to imitate a human relationship. This is not merely another smart speaker. It represents another step towards outsourcing conversation, judgment, memory, and emotional connections to powerful technology companies. OpenAI reportedly recruited 2 former Apple engineers to develop this dangerous new product. To me, I say no. Thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone. I'm Roger Stone. Until tomorrow, God bless you, and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?